Things Musicians Don't Talk About is supported by the Royal Society of Musicians. Since 1738, they have been providing vital financial assistance, advice and guidance to music professionals unable to work due to accident, illness, stress or anxiety. Whether you're working as a performer, administrator, technician or teacher, and everything in between, they're there to help. If you know of someone in need, you can contact them in confidence by visiting their website, which is www.rsmgb.org, or you can contact them by ringing 020 7629 6137. Support their work by becoming a member or donating today.
Welcome back to Things Musicians Don't Talk About. Today we are in the home of journalist, writer Jessica Duchen. Thank you, Jessica, for having us today. This is very exciting.
Really exciting.
You are so prolific in so many areas. I know you always look like unsure about that, but I think that's partly why I really wanted to talk to you, because you have a way of being incredibly trailblazing, but also very down to earth and real. I guess it's actually really interesting coming as a journalist myself. I first met you, I think we were in Battersea Arts Centre.
That's right. I remember it well.
And I remember just like never wanting the conversation to end, because you're just full of ideas and you write for so many different publications and you've got ideas for everyone. And it feels like you don't slow down. You're an incredibly busy woman. So tell us in kind of your words, what is the, what is it that you do? What is it that you've how did that journey begin?
Oh, well, hello, Hattie and Becca, and thank you so much for coming all the way here and having me on the show. It's an honour to be included. I've been in this business for probably more years than I'd like to admit. I started pretty young. I had my first article published in the Strad when I was 20, which was sheer fluke, really. I had a lot of encouragement from someone who had been a teacher of mine and then went through a few different incarnations of what he was going to do and ended up being editor of the Strad and knew I was interested in writing. So he sent me off to interview Ida Hendel. So, talk about jumping in the deep end. She was very keen to know how old I was because I was 20, but I probably looked about 11. And but was she going to tell me how old she was? No way on earth. But I loved having the chance to talk to my musical heroes. And I studied piano and I did music at university and I was studying piano all the while. And I realised when I finally got a job on a music magazine as assistant editor, I can go and meet all those musicians I've admired and ask them all the questions I've always wanted to ask them. So I did that. And I took it, I think, like the proverbial duck to water. I'd also been writing forever. I thought I wanted to be a novelist. And I've written about 7 novels along the way. Most recent one was about Beethoven, came out 5 years ago. I'm hoping to find a way to bring it out a second time with a publisher that has not gone bust. My old publisher went bust. But there's a Beethoven anniversary coming up, and I'm hoping to get it back out there somehow. But that's kind of how it all began.
You're very good at summarising your career.
Yeah, that was very succinct. I feel like I was introduced to your work because Hattie is always sending me your articles. She's going, look at this, she's amazing. And at least the articles that Hattie sends me are the kind of things that I've always wanted to read about, the kind of things that I believe the industry really needs to just like be dug up and like written in a way that's really holds people's feet to the fire a little bit. Were you always in that sort of a mindset when you went into journalism, or was that a sort of path you took later on in your career?
It's actually come a bit later. It's been when I was a sort of ex-musician myself, I was much more involved with wanting to ask pianists technical questions and interpreting Chopin and all of that. And as I've become more involved in the sort of real journalism side, the kind of hard news aspect of writing for national papers, I've become a little more aware that there are other things in life that need talking about that we're not getting talked about. So I think that there were a couple of turning points. One was that my sister died. She was 45. She died of ovarian cancer in 2000. And she was a great feminist. She was a specialist academic in French studies. She was about to become head of French at Sussex University when she got sick. And she was writing about the history of feminism in France. And I felt, I had grown up kind of in her shadow with the sort of real 1970s feminism going on all around me. It was quite something. And I looked at the music industry and I just thought, this is ridiculous. No one is talking about how horrendously women get treated in this industry. So that was one thing that changed me. And the other was that my husband was involved in a very horrible incident at his orchestra where 4 of them were basically kicked out for an entire season, cut off overnight without a penny for having had the temerity to sign a mass signature letter that was pro-Palestinian, that was published in a newspaper.
I had no idea about that.
This happened in 2011, so it's a good while ago. But you can imagine the stress levels. Actually, that the stress was so intense because there was an enormous scandal. It was blown up because there was a well-known blogger who sort of mistakenly conflated their letter with something that happened at an Israel Philharmonic prom the next day, more or less. And they got blamed for the whole thing, which was nonsense. They weren't actually involved in that prom in any way. They weren't there. But, people like to create a fuss. So that left me with the long-term health problem, which I'm going to be stuck with for the rest of my life, because it was triggered by that stress. And that made, I felt that I was being kind of muzzled as well by certain things that the orchestra made Tom sign. And I did not like that. And I thought, I'm not going to sit around anymore and let people get away with these sorts of things. And when there's investigation to be done, I'm bloody going to do it.
Mm-hmm. A lot of the things that you went on to write, I can imagine editors weren't used to, especially classical music, sort of editors probably weren't used to encountering. Did you find much resistance to pitching about these things from editors, or did you find that there was kind of like, thank God people are finally talking about it?
I've generally found newspaper editors very, very supportive on this. I mean, with the feminist thing, where I think I helped to get that ball rolling, more or less. It was about 2012 or 2013. I can't remember which. I had an enough is enough moment. I went to an industry event where there was a very beautiful opera singer who was presenting some leha or something, and the person who was announcing made some unbelievably inappropriate comment about this. And this entire kind of industry dinner sort of tittered politely, and I was the only one who sort of had my head on the desk more or less at this point. Thinking, how is this even thought? How can someone in that position even think this is acceptable? And how dare this room full of people say not recognise that there's more to all this than sycophancy? And I called my editor at The Independent the next day, because I was with The Independent for 12 years. I was freelancing, writing about music pretty on a regular basis. And I called him up and said, would you like an article about how the classical music industry is sexist up to its back teeth? And he said, I'll take 1,000 words if you can do it by lunchtime. So
Jessica can be quick if she needs to be.
Right, do this now.
I think I've got 1,000 words.
And then when it came to the Venezuela thing, which we'll talk about a bit later, I guess, my editor at the Times was absolutely wonderful. He was so thoughtful and so thorough, and really, he gave me all the sort of belt and braces things that I needed to do, because he's a music specialist, but he is also very much in an executive position on the Times. And he really knows how, the kind of legal things that journalists have to do and how to get the necessary stuff into a piece like that. He was incredibly supportive. The whole team at the Times were brilliant, because with Ilan Volkov, which was another one, there were a lot of interesting logistics involved, and the whole team really pulled together to make that happen.
I think a lot of our listeners would be really interested in the sort of logistics and the legal side of being a music journalist at the forefront, in many cases, of breaking stories that people don't want to talk about or don't want people to talk about.
Which would you like first?
Why don't we talk about Volkov?
Yeah, let's go specifically about this, and maybe if there are certain logistics that you're able to share that you had to sort of dodge around the realities of that.
Okay. So basically what happened was last summer at the Proms, Ilan Volkov was conducting the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. Ilan is Israeli, and he is horrified by what the Israeli government has been doing in Gaza. And he is, the trouble with being Jewish is, as I am myself, is that people expect you to toe the Israel line on everything just because you're Jewish, which makes no more sense than towing the British government line on everything just because you're British. But that seems to be what's expected, and that there's an enormous amount of tribalism, and people treat you as if you're a traitor if you say it's actually wrong to kill 70,000 people. So last summer, Ilan decided that he was going to use his platform as a conductor to make a statement about this. And he called me up. I've known him as a journalist for quite a while. I've interviewed him a few times in the past. We're in contact on Facebook, so he knows that I am of a kind of similar persuasion to him. And he wanted to talk through the impact that it might make, what might happen, how people would feel about it. So we had a good discussion about that. And I thought, God, this is an article that needs to be
So that was
done.
Before he actually made a statement.
Yeah, that was it. He was wondering whether to do it. And I said, look, would you like some coverage for this? Can we do an article? So we needed to organise this, because I was going away. It was the middle of summer, and then I was coming back, and the thing needed to come out fast. I mean, really fast after he had made the statement. So I had a discussion with the editors that I work with at the Times about how we were going to do it. So I did the interview with him. We got that sorted and written, but with space at the top and the bottom for adding in whatever actually transpired on the night. So I went to the prom. Ilan made his speech after the broadcast had finished, which was probably the sensible thing to do, because people had gone to enjoy the music. He did a brilliant Proms too. And then he wanted to make the statement distancing himself from what was going on.
Sort of as part of the encore?
It wasn't an encore. It was just, he came on to take a bow, and then he spoke to the audience at that point. So I was busy scribbling down what he said, and I zipped out of the hall, had to wrote it all down on my phone and sent it off to the Times. And there was someone in the office, it must have been about 10:30 by then, and they sort of whacked it onto the article, and out it came.
Was he very nervous about making this statement? Was there a sense of anxiety?
I think he must have been nervous, but I don't think he had any doubts.
He knew he was going to do it.
Yeah.
And probably the fact that you were writing this piece meant as well sort of had to.
Well, I think what made the big difference afterwards and why this became such big news was not so much the article that I wrote, it was the social media.
Yeah.
Because that speech was filmed and it went straight onto social media. And in 5 days, I think it had over 2 million views.
I read an article that it was specifically this one about telling musicians to shut up and play. And it was interesting. You said something about like perhaps the music is apolitical or can be separated from politics, but musicians themselves are sort of inherently political and they have their own views and opinions. For somebody like Volkov to take this chance to say something is in itself a huge deal, particularly because of where he comes from and, as you say, the sort of tribalism. When individual musicians themselves in an orchestra, say, or the dancer at the Royal Opera House unfurls a Palestinian flag, I suppose they're not afforded the same sort of, I was going to say protection. I suppose Volkov also didn't have a super amount of protection. But what are your opinions on individual orchestral members protesting or taking a stance as individuals?
Musicians are people. And I remember back when we were having the Brexit battles, there was some politician who said, oh, well, music won't be affected because music has no boundaries. You know, what a stupid thing to say. Music may have no boundaries, but musicians do. You have to get through the borders. So I was involved in a panel yesterday at the Association of British Orchestras conference about politics and polarisation in the orchestral world. And one thing we all agreed on was that music is political whether you like it or not. And Chopin actually is just as political as Shostakovich in his way. It's very hard to separate music from the context in which it was written, and I'm not sure that it should be separated. I think we understand it better if we look deeper into it like that. I know a lot of musicians who are really scared to be politically active or make their views felt, or indeed take any view whatsoever. But even not taking a view on politics is a political decision, because you say, oh no, I'm much too scared to get involved. You know, somebody might disagree with what I say, and then I'm going to lose work. And I think this is really sad, actually. I think we have a right to be the people we are. And if you have civilized conversations with another person, I hate this atmosphere we have now where people want to just be right about everything all the time, and if someone disagrees, they get kind of whomped on the head. I think we become better people through having these difficult discussions with people who have other opinions. But if we never have those discussions, how do we grow?
I've done an absolute tiny amount compared to you of talking to people about difficult areas to their life politics. And there is often a weight that you carry with you as a writer, at least from my experience of, anxiety handing that over and seeing the reaction. How do you kind of manage the mental health aspect of these issues that are clearly you're very passionate about and you get very involved in? Is there been a way of distancing yourself in some ways, or do you get quite nervous for something to come out still?
I do get nervous about what people will say about things, and whether there'll be unpleasant repercussions. I've been quite lucky that there hasn't been too much. I think other people have been less lucky. I don't know if that's because I don't read the comments boxes.
It's a good way to be.
I mean, I don't think I could handle reading the comments boxes.
Yeah.
But I stopped. There was a website that I used to write for that doesn't pay it's writers, but a lot of people write for them just because you get press tickets.
Yeah.
And the reviewing is the availability of space for reviewing is a whole other issue. But I was told by the editor there, you have to read the comments boxes. And I thought, you're not even paying me. I'm not going to read the comments boxes. I've got to guard whatever mental health I have left. Thank you very much.
Is that because they thought, well, then you can see what your audience wants you to write? Or what was the intention behind that comment?
I don't know. I do protect myself that way. And cat photos are very good when things get out of hand on Facebook. If discussions have got too heated, okay, time for another picture of the cat.
So funny. It also strikes me that you and your husband Tom are such a unit. I wonder, has his direct experience of being an orchestral musician kind of fueled or maintained a sense of empathy for you of what that experience is?
Oh, very much so. It gives me a kind of inside view on how orchestras work and how musicians' lives work that I don't think very many critics actually have. So I'm sometimes astonished by things I read or things people say around the industry that just show they have no clue how orchestras work. There was somebody who was, I can't remember. I mean, being in an orchestra means you have a lousy social life because it's a very antisocial job. And I remember we had to turn down some invitation or other because Tom was off on tour. And somebody said to me, "Oh, can't he put in a dep?" And I said, "I don't think anyone's put in a dep for 100 years." Why do people have this idea that's how it works? It doesn't. And also, if you don't work, you don't get paid. I think they don't realise that. I'm also lucky because certainly when we first got together, I do less of this now because I'm too busy, but I used to go and watch rehearsals sometimes. So I get to see the conductors working up close and I get the feel for who they are, how they work, what chemistry is like with the orchestra. I think that is a big privilege as well. And it's very, very helpful for what I do because I can see when a conductor is actually crap. And I know what the orchestral musicians are saying about it. And sometimes I can see that the conductor is crap before these things get said. And then someone will, I'll do some, I don't much like doing hatchet jobs, but occasionally I will do one. And then I will get almost inevitably a call from someone in the orchestra saying, "Thank God you said that."
That's so true. There's such a kind of underground world of orchestral musicians' opinions on conductors. And
it's the same reason that people don't want to speak out about anything, just in case. And I think what you're saying about critics, for example, don't really see the inner workings of what it's like to be a musician. I think it is such an odd world with its own rules. And I think this sort of feeds into this exceptionalism mindset around classical music that, people can get away with things because we're different over here. I mean, why do you think that's perpetuated even now that we have more access to posting things online and, with the rise of social media and putting stuff out there, you would think that it would be just easier for things to be exposed, I suppose. But why do you think this exceptionalism is perpetuated in classical music in particular?
I think we all have a big propensity to believe our own myths. And I think there are a great many myths in the classical music world. And I think we don't always probe what's behind that and look at the realities. It's something I find quite frustrating because I think those things need to be interrogated a little more rigorously than we like to interrogate them.
Should we talk about Venezuela then?
Yes, I think that's a very good moment to bring in Venezuela. So I don't have a horse in the Venezuelan race. So I came to it very much from the outside. 20 years ago or so, when the Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra, as it then was, began touring, we all fell madly in love with them. They're all these wonderful, vigorous young musicians, boogieing around, shouting "Mambo!" at the Albert Hall, and they, you just couldn't help yourself. There was so much verve and excitement and thrill and South American whatever about it, and there were some academics and also some right-wing journalists actually who said, hang on a minute, is this all it's cracked up to be? They say they are rescuing kids from the streets and giving them musical instruments and helping them to become musicians and changing their lives. And this is social transformation through music. Well, 20 years later, look at what Venezuela has become. A quarter of the population has left the country. What remains has been cast into penury by this kind of narco-criminal cartel that stole that last election, or allegedly stole that last election, but I think it's pretty indubitable that that's what happened. If that is social transformation through music, it's really working, isn't it? So the orchestra and El-Sistema were a fantastic advert for Venezuela, but Venezuela is not the greatest advert for them. I started looking at this a bit because I was cheerleading there've been a lot of fantastic spin-offs from El-Sistema, which are not affiliated to Venezuela. There's a European organisation that's doing great work. There's one in Raploch in Scotland, which is doing fantastic things. So it's one of those complex truths that we can find that really good things can come out of really complex, less positive situations. And there is a wonderful positive legacy from all this, but not necessarily in Venezuela itself. I had a certain amount of contact with other Venezuelans who were in exile and who were very unhappy and very cynical and actually quite furious about the way that we were all buying into that myth of El-Sistema and the Simón Bolívar Orchestra. And I started investigating a bit. And then I interviewed a festival director a couple of years ago who had booked the Simón Bolívar Orchestra for her festival. And I said, did you think twice about booking them? Did you have any qualms about that? And she said, not a bit of it. And she was very positive and very, just thrilled to have them on board. I then got a phone call from a prominent Venezuelan musician who read that and phoned me up in floods of tears. And she said, what is the matter with people over there? Why can't you see what I've been trying to tell you all this time? She's been exiled for years. She's not able to go back and see her family because, God knows what would happen to her if she did. And she's someone I think very highly of indeed. And I just thought, this really does need looking at. And I kind of explained, in Britain, Venezuela's the other side of the world. It tends to get wrapped up in what we kind of classify as banana republics. And there's this big myth that has blown up around it all. So then cue last year, and the Simón Bolívar Orchestra was coming to play at the Barbican. I can't remember if it was the day before Maduro's inauguration, the day of it, or the day after, but it was something like that. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like it was kind of a good moment to say, hang on a minute. So I had a discussion with my editor at the Times about this, I wanted initially to do just a kind of think piece about it. And he said, we actually need to look at this properly and in depth and from both sides. So
it's a lot of work for Jessica.
Yeah, so I thought, whoops.
What have I done?
But it was a fantastic opportunity to really dig into it. And I talked to a lot of musicians who were exiled. I then talked to the head of El-Sistema as well. You see, if you're writing stuff that is hard-hitting, you need to put their side of the story. You have to give them the chance to answer those issues. All the people on the El-Sistema and the management side say, it's absolute coincidence about the timing of that tour, and it's all about the availability of the conductor and the halls and the logistics of it. I didn't speak to a single exiled Venezuelan musician who thought for a moment that it was a coincidence. And the things that they were telling me that had gone on 20 years ago when all those fantastic tours were happening, stuff being smuggled out of the country on their planes, those kinds of things, enormous amounts of money being channeled from the Venezuelan state into their tours, and it was a bleak picture. And I asked what would happen if they went back, and they said anything up to being killed.
Were they nervous to speak to you about it?
I had help from my Venezuelan friend in finding people who actually wanted to speak, but even then, a lot of them didn't want to give their names. Some of them spoke to me on condition of being anonymous.
I think a lot of what I'm learning about your work is that it is a lot of the time rooted in trust and friendship. Is that how you see it as well, that the reason that you are able to go to this depth with people is because you've built up relationships?
You do build up relationships in the music world because it's so small and you are meeting the same people again and again. I hesitate to say it's about friendship because that's really dangerous. That's when you get into Epstein territory, all these friendships. And people can actually, who you think are friends, can turn around and really put the knife in. And I've had a couple of those in the past, so I'm quite circumspect about that. But I would say I have built up good professional relationships of trust and mutual respect. And some of those people I would count as friends, but that's not why I would get involved with the stories that they are perpetuating or putting forward. I would only cover something if I really believed in it.
I was going to ask about Epstein and whether you have any predictions for how classical music's going to come out the other side of this.
From what I've seen in the files that have been released so far, because they're out there, if you're over 18, you can search them. What I found so far is a rather depressing fact that Epstein played the piano and was quite a music lover.
I didn't realise that either.
He'd been on summer schools and stuff, and he wasn't an uncultured person. The musicians who were approaching him for funding were not the ones that we normally bump up against, certainly in this country, in the classical music industry. They were kind of crossover, big thinking, crossover, arena performing sort of people. There were some. There was one violinist who I think was Lithuanian, who was at Juilliard, who was a young woman who was getting funded. We don't know what she had to do in return, if anything, possibly nothing. I don't think that it's going to necessarily affect us too badly in the classical music world, in our little ivory tower.
Do you really think not?
I would be surprised if it did. I think those sort of people think we are small fry.
I think also anybody that's been mentioned has already had a shadow of suspicion over them for other behaviours previously, and they've either still had a career or they've sort of conveniently stepped down. So I feel like, I mean, it sort of ties into, because in the Venezuelan piece you talked about art washing and sort of classical music being co-opted for propaganda.
Yeah, exactly.
And I sort of, classical music does seem to get used by people however they want it to be used. And I wondered whether you had any thoughts on why, because as you say, musicians are often very passionate. I know a lot of musicians that have very strong opinions, very strong political opinions, very strong senses of identity. They may be worried to speak out about them. But how is it that collective groups of people that are oftentimes staunchly leftist get sort of co-opted for, you know, sometimes fascism and propaganda for fascism?
I think we're incredibly naive in the music world. If you think, you know, you're both musicians yourselves, you know how much work it is to be a musician. You have to practice, and you spend a lot of time with your instrument and your four walls, because you have to if you want to achieve that standard. So you're not out there. You are in your own little world, and it's kind of inevitable. I know when I was a student, I spent a lot of time practicing the piano and trying to find places to practice the piano, and you know, fighting for my right to practice the piano, which my university didn't want to let me.
And getting kicked out of practice rooms.
Yes, exactly. And that is your world. Yeah. And the other students at my university they were going off on demonstrations about Nicaragua. They were going to Greenham Common. It was as long ago as that. And they were involved in all kinds of interesting, you know, current affairs, literary, political, all kinds of goings on. And I never did any of it because I was bloody practicing.
So real.
Yeah. So it really reminds me of the argument that, you know, because we're not so used to critical thinking, especially with the rise of AI, that people are much more easily going to be persuaded by sort of emotional speeches and stuff. I do think it's sort of the same, that we have this belief in classical music that because we're in touch with our emotions to such a high level and we analyze things and we're so in tune with the world, that this means that we maybe will be intuitively correct about things.
I'm afraid quite the opposite is often true. Yeah. I'm sorry to say, but I wish that there was some kind of course in a conservatory, you know, the real world for musicians.
Maybe you'll have to build it.
I'm not sure anyone would dare to take it on, frankly.
That would be an awful job. Can you imagine trying to make musicians go to a class that they don't want to go to? Yeah. It was bad enough trying to get them to go to.
They definitely wouldn't go.
I've got a friend who used to teach at Curtis and took great pride in failing a very, very prominent pianist's exam papers because she never came to lectures.
Yeah, wow. It strikes me that you often, what people say about talking, you know, in this way about classical music and exposing big issues, or talking about the musician as a human being, is there's a sort of, the backlash is often, why can't we just think about the music and focus on the escapism, and it should be a lovely escape. And it feels like your journalism is almost, I don't know if you see it in half, but it feels like you've maintained such a passion for music, and you do have there are a lot of pieces you write that are very much about the beauty and escapism of music and playing the piano, being an opera singer or whatever. But then it feels like there's also the other side of your real passions and what you think is right. Is that a conscious thing? Do you think two things are very much true in your life at the same time? This real love and this real desire for change and exposing things?
Yeah, I don't think they're incompatible at all. I mean, I wrote a book which came out last year about the pianist Myra Hess, who was, you know, the most fantastic artist and the deepest thinking and the most sparky and wonderful performer, amazing personality. And she she turned her passion for music, which she devoted her entire life to, she kind of almost weaponized chamber music during World War II. She created and ran throughout the war a series of lunchtime concerts in the National Gallery, which became a real symbol of national resistance, because Londoners would go to those concerts come what may. And they ran every day right through the Blitz, in the bomb shelter, but they were down there playing Mozart, while the day after there'd been some horrendous bombing raid by the Luftwaffe. And I think for her, it was all very much part of the same thing. And she became the change that she wanted to see because she had to, because there was no other way for her to do what she wanted to do. And I think she's a great role model.
I didn't really expect to ask you about this, but it has occurred to me, you are also involved in the opera world and have criticised opera, do sometimes criticise opera. And one of your last reviews was Katie Mitchell's Macropolis Case. I'm just interested on your thoughts on an artist like Katie Mitchell deciding to leave opera entirely because of misogyny. Do you kind of respect that decision? Do you think, it's a shame she can't stay and change things? What's your views on her decision?
Well, I've not actually talked to her about her decision, so I don't know what the realities are behind this. I don't know what it was that sort of sparked this choice. And I don't know how much it's perhaps been a little bit twisted by repetitions that may not, for all I know, be accurate. So it's difficult to say. I think she's a great loss. I think she is brilliant in many ways. I've seen some productions of hers, which I will never forget. I think Written on Skin was one of the great experiences of contemporary opera. And she did such a great job working together with George Benjamin, and the whole team on that was completely inspiring and marvellous. And I also really am a fan of her Lucia di Lammermoor, because I actually hate Lucia di Lammermoor, and it's the only time I've enjoyed it.
It's the grit.
Yeah. I think it's really sad that she has made that decision, but I totally respect an artist's choice to move in a different direction, because we're not here forever. We have only one life. We have only a certain amount of time in which to choose the things that we do. And I think if somebody is finding that something is more trouble than it's worth, then I don't blame them at all for moving on to something that is perhaps more rewarding.
Do you think her taking that stand, I mean, it doesn't feel like in classical music or opera someone has left and made a statement in that way before, or maybe not for a while? Maybe you can remember another example.
I can't actually. I don't know of anyone else who has made that choice.
Do you think that is going to change things in opera?
I doubt it very much. I think it's very difficult to change things in opera, just because it takes such a long time it's a very slow turnover time. People are booking 5 years in advance in some cases. And that means it's really difficult to affect change. And the amount, I do opera librettos as well, and the number of commissions for new opera that exist. We can't change something if there is maybe one full new opera being performed at the leading contemporary opera house of the country. It's maybe one new piece every 3 years.
It's so depressing.
Yeah, on the main stage. This is glacial, and there's a lot of talent out there that is not getting the opportunity to be heard because of this. I know it's very difficult. The whole funding model is broken, and the whole support model is broken, and the level of risk that you are taking when you put on a new opera is absolutely massive. The financial risk and the reputational risk if it doesn't go well. There isn't room to fail.
Yes.
for example.
Is it possible to create more room to fail in the industry as it stands currently?
I don't think it is, because you need money and there isn't any, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
Certainly in this country.
I had one more question, but it was about more of a personal relationship, because you did a piece about grief and music and how that supported you through the process. How is your relationship with grief and music now? Like, these years later, has it changed?
I think, well, what happened to me was that my mother and my father and my sister all died of cancer, one after the other, within a period of 6 or 7 years. I was 28 when my mum died, she was ill for 8 years first. And then my father died 2 years later, and my sister 4 years after that, having fallen ill while my dad was terminally ill. So it does hit you. It's not, it's hard to recover from one bereavement, let alone 3. And there are still certain pieces of music that I find very, very difficult to listen to. For instance, my sister had time in the hospice before she died to plan her own funeral, and she wanted to have the Mozart Requiem. Can I be in a room with the Mozart Requiem now? No, I cannot. I cannot go near that piece. When my mother was dying, I found that the only thing I could bear to listen to was the St. Matthew Passion. And I have to feel quite strong now to go to the St. Matthew Passion, which actually is one of my favourite pieces of music of all time. But it's just, it has such associations. I think when my dad died, I was playing a lot of Janacek on the piano. I hadn't known that the Janacek pieces of On an Overgrown Path had been written kind when his daughter either was dying or had just died. I didn't learn that till afterwards, but somehow I kept going back to those pieces again and again. And again, I'm not I keep my distance a bit from those, because it just, music plunges you right back into the space you were at the time it made the biggest impression.
I made a fatal error in choosing O Magnum Mysterium for my mum's funeral, which wasn't a particularly personal piece to me. It was just that we all really liked it, and we found like a brass band recording of it because we all played the trumpet, and it just seemed to kind of fit. It was such a sudden death that we didn't really have any time. And unfortunately, people have that a lot at their weddings. So I've been to so many weddings now that I've just sat there like, what a stupid mistake. Oh, no. But do you ever listen to them on purpose to revisit, or do you prefer to stay clear?
I try and keep my distance. I mean, I have been to quite a few performances of the St. Matthew Passion just because I really love it, and it doesn't actually, other than it coming around every Easter, it's, apart from that, you don't encounter it as often as all that. And sometimes you get a really special performance with someone wonderful conducting that you don't want to miss. But I don't do that deliberately to revisit that space. I kind of want to get as far away from that as I can.
When we were researching for this, we were saying how many different episodes we could have, conversations we could definitely have with you. And there are things I could keep asking you, but I feel like you've been so generous and you've given us such an amazing range of, I don't know, courageous, brilliant, inspiring things to think about. So, Jessica, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We generally do end our episodes with just a small win of the week that is something from our week that, we're proud of, has inspired us.
I actually did think of one.
Well done.
It's so small, but...
That's good.
Yes, perfect. I've just been feeling really overwhelmed, like a low level of overwhelmedness all the time. And yesterday I just had a series of different friends texting me all at the same time. It was such a stupid sensation because I could have just put my phone down and just decided to not look at my phone. But I just said to one of them, because we were sort of mid-flow of conversation, I just said, I will reply to this later because I just need to not look at my phone right now. I need to just sit and look out the window. And obviously they were really understanding. But it was just a small act of, I know this is making me feel overwhelmed. So why am I feeling this pressure to keep replying to people? Anyway, it was tiny, but it worked.
There's something really that feels really exposing about putting down even a tiny boundary like that.
So stupid.
No, I really get it.
Did either of you have anything?
Can you think of something, Jessica? Please help.
Well, I'm having quite a busy week. So on Wednesday, my publisher of my Myra Hess book drafted me in to speak at a literary lunch for the Stationers' Company, which was in a beautiful old pub in the city, which I didn't know existed. I think it must have survived the Great Fire of London. It's a real extraordinary Tudor space on Watling Street. And I had such a great time. I had a lovely interviewer who had read the book and knew all about Myra and was a big fan, and really interesting people through the lunch. Everyone had interesting things to talk about. I had a botanist next to me who'd written a book about trees, and I love trees. And, it was a real treat. And it just made me think there are so many people in this city of ours who are doing such interesting things and have had amazing, fascinating lives. And how do you, we'll never know them all. But what an absolute treat to be brought into contact with them in this way. And they like my book. And that's always nice as well, because you always think, well, does anyone know who Myra Hess was anymore? And actually they do. And if they didn't, they want to find out. So that was encouraging. And that really gave me a bit of a boost.
That's so lovely. Nice, yeah, because often, was it like you did a talk and then you had lunch together?
Well, it was, I think we were at sort of 3 longish tables in the upstairs room of this pub. And we had our main course, and then this very, very knowledgeable young woman interviewed me about the book for about half an hour or so. And then we had dessert.
Oh, that's so good.
Could be quite stressful though.
Yeah, but you're not hungry. You just like being fed, and then you get to talk, and then you get fed again. That's the ideal day.
Yeah, but you can't really have the wine.
True. I've made that mistake too many times before I've reviewed something. And I'm like, I often write in my notebook, like,
wine.
Is this confusing or am I just drunk? I'm not going to blame the conductor, because I think I'm probably just a bit too drunk right now. Mine, and I still can't think. So I'm just going to say that I think I am proud, and I see this as a win, that my editorial team now they have around me at work at Mark Allen I have 2 incredible women working with me. One of them interviewed you actually last year, Holly.
Yes.
And then Georgia as well now has just joined sort of as Holly's replacement, and Holly's been given a full-time position. And they are both just like so beautiful and inspiring and supportive of me. And every day I go into work to work with them, it's just like how I never imagined it could be. And neither of them have a classical background, but they've just decided to become so incredibly curious and interested and dedicated. And I'm just like totally in awe of them. And I'm proud of that, because I think, and also with my boss, Martin, I think we've just created a space for them not to feel afraid to come into our classical world and just to embrace it. And I think that's, I'm just really proud of that. I couldn't think of anything else, but actually that's quite a good win.
It's really cool, and such a sort of template of, I mean, what we would hope for new classical music audiences, really, to make people feel like they can come into the space without prior knowledge and still be curious and interested in it.
Actually, Holly's bringing her boyfriend to Così fan tutte opens tonight at ENO. She's bringing him along, which is just really sweet.
It'll be
more. His first opera. So, yeah, it's just like
beautiful.
Things like that are just so lovely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessica, for your time.
Oh, thank you both. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for having us in your beautiful house.
You will always be such an inspiration to young writers and
musicians.
And musicians, exactly. So thank you for what you've done and what you continue to do. And yeah, I hope your novel gets republished.
So do I.